LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I
filed my return,
but I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do?
My refund, though. I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Anyway, that whole trip was like, that was my future. I didn't know it, but I did. I mean, it just spoke to, the whole experience spoke to me. And
hello, and welcome to another new episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we dig a little deeper into the pivotal moments that shaped the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. Today, I'm excited to have Matthew Caws on the show. He is, of course, the frontman and songwriter of Nada Surf. Since breaking out in the mid-90s with the song Popular, the band has evolved far beyond its early alt-rock roots, building a decades-long career on thoughtful, melodic songwriting and a deeply loyal fan base. Today, he shares his memories of Michael Carlucci, who passed away in 2015, and talks about the lasting influence he's had on his life.
it's been lovely and kind of moving to dive back into the story of this particular person. It's meeting a person, and this person was Michael Carlucci, who was in a group called Winter Hours. And I met him because he was working in a record store called Record Runner on Cornelia Street that then at some point in the early 80s opened another branch on Jones Street, and then the one on Cornelia Street turned into Hideout and Subterranean, and now it's gone. But anyway, in 1986, I was in my second term of college. I was at Hunter College, and I was failing out. I wasn't going to class very much. I'd done very well the first term, and then I just, I don't know what happened. I became disinterested. I went back to college later, but I think I just needed a break. And I was wandering around the West Village, maybe trying to get lost or just window shopping or something. And I went into this basement record store, and it was cluttered in a pleasing way, like lovingly cluttered. And the walls and ceilings were totally covered in records that were, thumbtacked up, and posters and postcards and all kinds of things. And there were 3 young women who were talking to the one guy behind the counter, one tiny counter. I mean, it's a little room. And I was hearing the conversation and not wanting to insert myself, but, interested. I was always kind of a floater, kind of like a sometimes gregarious, sometimes shy, sometimes loner, sometimes not, I always felt like I was shifting throughout the day, But I became interested in what they were talking about. They were talking about this group called the Hoodoo Gurus, who I'd never heard of, and who were opening for the Bangles at the Beacon Theater a few days later, and they were talking about going. And I somehow struck up a friendship with all 4 of them, and ended up going to one of these Hoodoo Gurus shows, and then became a Hoodoo Gurus fanatic. They became my favorite band immediately. Stone Age Romeos had just come out, their debut. And this guy behind the counter was really affable, and there you have an energetic kind of vibe with somebody where you just feel comfortable, and I just felt comfortable around him. And he also seemed genuinely interested in me, which was a new thing for me. And so I began visiting him a lot in this shop. And at the time, my music taste was, I'd gone from sort of classic rock to my older sister listening to WNYU, which was the new wave station in New York a lot. So she was into, punk and new wave. And so I was getting into that. And then, REM, Echo and the Bunnymen, all kinds of things. My sister went to went to Harvard, and they had a good radio station there, and she really dove in. She liked a lot of interesting things, and just talking to her the other day, she was like, if my young self would see me now that I no longer know every Yardbirds B-side. Yardbirds, with that was her, that was a tippy top, but it was also, she's a big Robin Hitchcock Soft Boys fan, Dream Syndicate, all kinds of things. But Michael, behind the counter, again, who I was really enjoying hanging out with, he played me the first Dylan that I'd heard that wasn't the greatest hits records, and he played me the Flying Burrito Brothers, and he played me Television, and really set that up, this is important. And then all kinds of things. His shop, there was a lot of Bowie, a lot of Velvets, a lot of Patti Smith, and in fact, in sort of diving into stuff online before talking to you, I hadn't realized that Patti Smith had curated a Record Store Day compilation, and the photo is in that shop. Her son worked there, and I guess she visited a lot. What am I going to tell you? So why this set me on all kinds of paths? First of all, jumping way ahead, I probably wouldn't have met my wife if I hadn't spent time there, because I spent so much time there that he ended up asking me to cover for him in the shop while his band went on tour. This band, Winter Hours, who were from East Rutherford, New Jersey, really good band, and Michael was the lead guitar player. And so I did, and so that got me really interested in record stores, and then I ended up working in one years later where I met my wife. He started asking me to come along to his gigs and help out. And so I was a sort of unpaid intern roadie mascot, maybe. And they played at Maxwell's a lot. And then they played at the Grotto with the Miracle Legion, who I love. And I mean, I discovered so much music through that connection, through Michael, and just being around a kind of a scene that I wasn't part of. I'm not sure I've ever really been a part of a scene, but I've been adjacent to some, and finally, I was just thinking that there's a certain kind of band photo from the early or mid '80s where there's it's not just that there's a uniform, but that there's certain elements of the way bands would dress, and I didn't tick these boxes. Like, it would be some kind of a patterned shirt, a collared buttoned shirt, not white, sometimes plaid or dots or something like that, tucked in to jeans, no belt. The jeans would be, skinny jeans weren't a thing there, so just kind of straight, sometimes faded, sometimes pre-faded, light, maybe just old. Gym socks, white gym socks, and black low top or whatever you call it, hard soled shoes. They could be Doc Martens, but probably not, probably something else. You can see it on some replacements photos in particular, but yeah, the white gym socks. I get nostalgic seeing photos from that era, even though I didn't necessarily, I wasn't not dressing like that on purpose. I just didn't think, I didn't have a very clear vision of what I was wearing. It was only years later that I realized top and bottom are a thing, like you are a whole person. I was always just like, I'm from the waist up. I don't know what's happening. But then a whole scene, there are all kinds of bands that I would have missed out on. But that's not even the point. The point is that Michael was a really luminous person, and he had some issues that I didn't know about in later years. I would notice he was looking not quite as healthy, but always made time, and worked really hard in that store. He ended up, I guess he kind of ended up owning it and changed the name to Subterranean. But there was some substance use there, but that he wore quite gracefully. And later, he ended up getting clean, and it was one of the most. This is over a 20-year span. I mean, I knew him for a really long time. He ended up seeming like an example of somebody who went through something and then dropped it, like came out, like he'd molted his skin, a heavier skin, and now he was lighter. And I was going through hard times too, and then I would come see him, and he would always cheer me up. He was always just really, really positive. Kind of like a philosophical person who wasn't. I mean, he's super smart, but I mean, in terms of the philosophical side of him, it wasn't that he was speaking in long sentences about that. He'd just be like, "It's gonna be all right, man. Just but literally, just look at the sky." He was kind of became kind of a Zen presence. So it was quite moving. Yeah, just now I was going over his Facebook page, and there are just a lot of tributes from a lot of people. And there's a thing called I guess it's a record company, and I apologize that I hadn't heard of them. They seem to have wonderful artists, but they are called phooey, I can't find it. Like Rhyme and Reason Records or something. And there's this Hoboken family tree that has East of Venus on it. And East of Venus is a group he had towards the end of his life, which was Glenn Mercer from the Feelies, Stan Demiski, the drummer, also from the Feelies, Rob Norris from the bongos. Stan Demiski is one of my favorite drummers ever. He plays on the first Luna record, and he has a kind of really elegant stiffness. He manages to make the word stiff is recast. It's like there's a rigidity, but it's so beautiful, and you can sense that there's a rubberiness, but deep down inside it, there's a kind of rigor that is super exciting. I mean, his snare rolls really make me very happy. So Michael was in a band called Red Buckets with Stan Demiski. It was apparently a band from Philly, and two of their members were leaving, or they were missing two members, and he and Stan, who I guess were childhood friends, then joined, and then Red Buckets slowly turned into Ward 8. Ward 8 turned into Winter Hours. It's worth looking for a song. I mean, there are a lot of songs that are worth looking for. Winter Hours have a lot of great songs. Hyacinth Girl, Island of Jewels. There's this Red Bucket song called Jane September, and I think there probably been 3 versions of that recorded, and at one point Michael was sort of trying to convince me to be in a band with him, and this is when I was 17, and be the singer. I just didn't feel up to it. I mean, there are some things I've turned down in my life, and I don't regret it, because I just look back and think, well, that's how you felt at the time, and it's fine, But anyway, the version that's on the East of Venus record is really great. They're all really good, but it's got this it sort of sounds like a bit like Tell Me When It's Over by the Dream Syndicate, but it's not a rip. I just think it's just a vibe that probably got written at the same time on both coasts, But this particular kind of snaky, jangle is an overused word, but there's a snaky kind of truly pretty kind of modal guitar playing that he was really good at. What to tell you? Oh, and then one funny thing is that they knew I was a big Hoodoo Gurus fan, and they got offered a tour opening for the Gurus through the South it's like 86, 87, and they asked me to be the roadie, and I bought my own ticket and met them in Nashville and hung out with them for a week, and they didn't pay me. I probably didn't realize that you could get paid for that. I was just so excited to go. I'm not saying that they weren't, it's not like it's mean. It's just like I was a terrible roadie. So why would they pay me? It's just like they were bringing their young friend, I mean, I tried, but I'm sure it was awful. But they, it was such a kick. It was right before Blow Your Cool came out, and total respect to the Gurus, but that record, I would say, is possibly a little overproduced, maybe suffering from a little bit of I like a lot of the quirks of 80s production that are sometimes brought up as not great. I love a lot of them, but you can go too far. And but so I heard those songs for the first time just in a club, totally sizzly and super exciting. Like What's My Scene, which I think is a really, really great, just great pop song. And so being in the van with them, I'd gone on some trips, but this was a long one, and like going through the South, and it was like spring or summer, and after the show, driving another hour and drinking a beer with the window open and the lights off, and then just playing good music, and you could sort of taste the air because it was really floral. They played in Athens, the 40 Watt, and we went some bar after that was really crowded, and like Michael Stipe was holding the door open for me when I walked in, or not for me, but was holding it open when I walked in. And we stayed at the Dream So Real house. It was a band that he really liked. But anyway, that whole trip was like, it was like that was my future. I didn't know it, but I did. I mean, it just spoke to the whole experience spoke to me, and now I've toured a ton, and I'm sure I'll do it a bunch more, but it's not like there's anything left to discover. I say this often, but some friend of mine a long time ago said about the Beatles, like, you don't have to listen to them, you just play them in your brain, So I feel that way about touring, but again, I still love it, and it's a total super privilege. But yeah, that first week with them really marked me. It got under my skin. And then working at the record store was so much fun. It was being sold at the time, so we weren't taking in any new product. So and we didn't take credit cards. So all I did was sit there, read old NMEs and melody makers, listen to whatever I wanted to, sold stuff for cash, and that's it. And then, put up a back in 5 minutes sign and went to the bagel shop and got some lunch. I mean, it was a dream job, absolute dream. And one night I was invited over to the nearby apartment of like one of the local record store owners, because I ended up getting to know, the store's kind of connected, or knew each other, but I remember being in this guy's apartment. It was like 4 or 5 record store owners playing Name That Tune. And it was really like, the only one I got, which was really exciting, was somebody played Cars by Gary Newman, but slow. The beginning of it slow is great. It's like wah 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 wah. And since then, actually, my wife's telling me we should put on a night nearby doing this. But I love playing 45s at 33. Famously, the Dolly Parton Jolene is great, but I've been collecting them with that in mind, and there are a lot that are just fantastic.
So this experience of working with Michael was kind of like your musical indoctrination.
Totally, and I'd had some. Right. My sister had indoctrinated me a little bit into just, underground music and stuff, or indoctrinated me also into becoming obsessive about something in a great way. Like you can discover there's more joy to be had if you just dig in. But yeah, this was like a totally holistic, the whole thing. It's like meeting Michael and hanging out down there was like an accelerant to something I was kind of already doing, because Daniel Lorca is the bass player in Not a Surf. He and I were in a band in high school, and then we lasted, well, I don't know, through 2 or 3 years, and then we had a breakup, and then didn't talk for a year or two, and then kissed and made up, and then formed a second band, and then a third band, and then this one. But so yeah, I was in a band, and we were called The Cost of Living, and Michael ended up getting us onto this compilation called Eastern Shores that Yellow Tango were on, and I can't remember, Cowboy and Spin Girl, Spiral Jetty. Yeah, so I was already doing it, but this was like also the future, because he got me interested in some kinds of things that I couldn't do then, like kinds of music or kinds of freedom in writing or playing that I still don't totally have, but more than then. It's interesting. It's like hearing something that you then put in your taste bank, like later I'll be able to do something with this, or I'll remember, or this really will continue to fascinate me, or something like that.
It was those musical lessons and support from Michael that helped push Nada Surf forward. So how did Nada Surf go from that to getting the Cars frontman Rick Ocasek to produce their first album?
Yeah, that was some luck. We, at the beginning of Nada Surf, the band that we'd been in before that, called Because, with the really great songwriter called Robert Randall, we couldn't quite get off the ground, but we tried, and in a very New York kind of way, had tried to, maybe skip a few steps. We were trying to get signed, to probably, I guess it was, Robert was doing most of the hustling, but, he was aiming pretty high. And we ended up, as far as we got is that we started working with Richard Grable, who's a lawyer who, it's a lot of indie rock stuff, like, Sonic Youth and Dinosaur and probably stuff like that, but a lot of things. And he was, a very connected person. And so we got to play in front of kind of the right people, and then it just didn't work out. And how Nada Surf happened is that sort of networky aspect of it, while I found it interesting, I also found it very depressing. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I wanted to get back to just the fun part, which is just the practice space. That's to this day, it's almost the best thing. I've said this, I think this a lot, but like getting a song right, or getting a song the way it's going to be, or achieved in the practice space, and then playing it again and again, I find that to be the biggest high. Having an audience sing along, of course, that's incredible, but so technically maybe that is, but for some, that's what really, really speaks to me, is when in the practice space. Anyway, I wanted to get back to that, and so with Nada Surf, we just didn't try anymore. I took a job at Guitar World as a assistant editor, and that was the first time in a while that I'd, let me take a job that I'm not threatening to quit. Let me just stay here for a while. And we were playing at a place called Rebar on West 16th Street, and played for like 30 people. And a guy called Bobby McCain came up to me after the show and said, I really liked you guys. Do you have a tape? And I said, yeah. And he said that he worked at a label called Number 6, who I'd heard of because the Unrest record, Imperial FFRR, was on Number 6. And also they had a Dean Wareham single, and I really like Luna. So that was my dream. Most of what I liked was on independent labels. So gave him a tape, and he called me the next day and said that he had given the tape to his friend, a guy called Ben Weber. What he said was, my day job is at Elektra. And his friend Ben Weber then gave it to his boss, and we were offered a deal that next day. They said, will you come up to the office? So we marched up to the office, and they offered us a deal, and that was great. You know what? Hold on a second. I got this backwards. 2 weeks before that, this is the lack of sleep. That is all true, and that all happened. But 2 weeks before that, I had a demo tape in my pocket. I was walking into, Leonard Street Knitting Factory, and Rick Ocasek was walking in, or walking out, or I was walking out. He was walking in. Anyway, I'd always loved him. I'd loved the Cars. Loved everything about them, and just he seemed like a really sweet person. And I worked up my nerve and went up and asked him if I could give him a cassette, and he was very friendly and affable about it. And 2 weeks later, he called me and invited me over to his house on 19th Street, and I went there, and this is my favorite part of this whole thing, is that I locked my bike to nothing. I was so spaced out. Well, not spaced out. I was so like not even on Earth. I was just, and it was spring, and it was beautiful out, and I was on my bicycle, and but I was so in a dream. Like, was this happening? I'm locking my bike outside his house, and then I go and then I'm invited in, and I meet Paulina, who's super nice, and I sit at their kitchen table, and he's making me he's making coffee for himself. I think it's like 8 p.m. And she says, he really likes your phrasing. And that was a really big deal, and kind of like parallel to Michael Carlucci taking an interest in me. Those were the first two times that interest came in my direction rather than, I was just interested in everything myself. It's always going out, but then it coming in was something, because that's really energizing, or brave making, I guess. Anyway, so I played him our demo, and he said you could put it out the way it is, but if you ever make this record again, I'd love to produce it, and I'll do it real cheap. And so anyway, so now fast forward to this Elektra office, and they said, who would you want to produce your record? And we said, oh, Rick Ocasek. And they said, well, if you can get him. And that was a funny part too, because we got to say, well, actually, he already wants to do it. So then it took a while to decide where to sign. And the thing is that I'd always wanted to be on an indie label, but and I had already sent tapes to Matador and Merge and stuff, but they were getting 1 million tapes. And then before meeting, and this maps back to the record store and Michael Carlucci, actually, is that a couple of weeks before meeting Rick Ocasek, I was sitting on the subway, and Mitch Easter was sitting like 10 feet away, and he was reading the paper, and I was too shy. I couldn't do it. And that's why I was determined to, after that, then saw Rick and went right up to him, is because I'd regretted it. I thought, you really just got to do that. And I met him years later. I met Mitch, who's super sweet. And he said, you chose the other path, man. You never know what would have happened.
Popular was their first single, and man, did that song take off. Was that a surprise?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. That was a huge surprise. And in fact, I've told this story a few times, but I really enjoy it. I hadn't conceived of that song that way. What I meant to do was something more like, there's a Velvet song called Temptation Inside Your Heart. There's a Pavement song called, I think, Mouth of a Desert. There's The Gift by the Velvet Underground. Also, songs where there's a lot of talking, but it's buried. I mean, The Gift is interesting because on one side it's a story, and on the other side it's music, so that you mix it to taste. But a number of those other songs I mentioned, it's like the vocals are really buried. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I had a dear childhood friend, Catherine Talese, who I'd known from school. She talked on one side, I talked on the other, and we were both sort of riffing and or reading out of this book that I'd bought at my local Goodwill for 25 cents, which was called Penny's Guide to Teenage Charm and Popularity, which was a hilarious book because it quite straight-facedly was giving advice that, some good advice, but also unlikely advice, like about dating, like, just break up after a month and then you can date again and just, keep moving. But the advice about how to break up with somebody is actually pretty good, just be honest and be direct, and, understandably the person's there'll be some pain, but point is, that's what I had in mind. And there's a great New York engineer producer called Bryce Goggin, who we'd found because I really loved the Chavez debut, Gone Glimmering, which he had worked on, and he had also done a lot of Pavement stuff. Anyway, he was mixing that song, the first version of it that was on a demo tape, and he said, so what's happening here? I told him, and he said, okay, well, give me 10 minutes, and then I'll get you back in here, but leave me alone for 10 minutes, because he liked to work at the top of a song by himself. And so he called me in 10 minutes later, and he said, okay, check it out. And he played it, and instead of my voice buried on one side and Catherine's voice buried on the other, it was just mine in the middle, really loud. And I was like, no, turn that down. No, totally, no. And he kept his finger firmly on the fader, wouldn't move it, and looked up at me and said, listen to that. That is a pop song. I'm like, pop? No. Oh. And he was, he was right. It's a weird pop song, but it kind of is a pop song. So I really owe him for that. So even I guess my point is, even what it became on record was surprising to me, to say nothing of becoming heard a lot. I think the video helped. Jesse Peretz directed that video and did an incredible job, and so I think that really kind of, I mean, it was more successful as a video than as a song, because it was the most played video, I think, for 2 months in the summer of '96 on MTV, which in fact went much too quickly. So the record wasn't in stores yet. So the idea was, let this song simmer for a while and then make a video and let it slowly climb up. And then right when it's doing something, hopefully the record will be in stores. But in fact, it had already peaked by the time the record came out. It had been totally ubiquitous for a little while, but nobody could buy the record.
I want to thank Matthew for being on the show today and for sharing so many thoughtful stories and reflections from his journey. Right now, he's been working on a solo record, and it's exciting to know that new music is on the horizon. We'll definitely be keeping an ear out for that when it makes its way out into the world. And I'll end with a quick reminder that you can buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That, on 90s artists, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please leave a review where you're listening. It always helps others find us. And of course, subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.
You know what they say. Early bird gets the ultimate vacation home. Book early and save over $120 with Vrbo. Because early gets you closer to the action. Whether it's waves lapping at the shore or snoozing in a hammock that overlooks, well, whatever you want it to. So you can all enjoy the payoff come summer with Vrbo's early booking deals. Rise and shine. Average savings $141. Select homes only.